And now to our next conversation. Last week, the Board of Governors of the International Monetary Fund approved the general allocation of special drawing rights equivalent to $650 billion, the largest SDR allocation in the history of the IMF. And this to buffer the impact of COVID-19 among member states. Allocations begin on the 23rd of this month. What are the expected impact on the market? We have Omotola Bimbola, our investment analyst at Chapel Hill Denham. Omotola, great to have you. Good morning.
Pleasure. Good morning.
Yeah, so Nigeria is set to get about $3.35 billion. And as at February, interest rate on SDR was about 0.05%. Any idea what it is now, and what are the other conditions attached to this SDR?
Thanks once again for having me, and thank you for the important question. So to answer your question, there are two layers to it. The first thing to note is that the current general allocation of the SDR is entirely cost-free to member countries. So even though nationally, countries are meant to pay a 0.05% interest rate on the SDR, the IMF also pays an equivalent interest rate to member countries on the SDR asset. So at the end of the day, the interest payments nets off, and that's why we can describe this to be an entirely cost-free, funding for developing, countries to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic. So essentially, this is not a typical IMF program. So we normally have some other IMF programs, such as the rapid credit financing, and the other financing activities of the IMF. So those typically come with some conditions, and then you pay, some interest charges on those facilities, although very, very marginal. So this is not the case. The SDR is essentially an international reserve asset that is created by the IMF and then, used to supplement the external reserves of member countries, particularly in times of crisis, such as the one we are currently living in. So as we all know, over the past 18 months or thereabouts, global economy has been faced with the COVID-19 pandemic, which is both an healthcare and economic crisis. And for developed countries that have their, that have their domestic currencies being international reserve currencies, they typically have been able to respond countercyclically to the current crisis, both in terms of fiscal and monetary policies. So they've been able to print, money headlessly to support their economy in terms of both the households and also the businesses as well. But for developing countries such as Nigeria, we do not have the same luxury. So mainly because we cannot respond in the same wavelength, such as also create a balance of payment challenge, for our economy. So that is why the IMF has come with this initiative, essentially to create a cost-free international reserve asset to member countries that can be used to supplement their reserves, and therefore, support the response of these countries to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, to the second part of this question, so even though I said that this allocation is entirely cost-free, the way it works is that, the SDR itself is not a means of exchange. That is, you cannot use it to purchase goods, to import into the country, for instance. To be able to now use the SDR to be able to make purchases, to import goods and services into the country, to import vaccines are very, very important at the moment. We then have to, exchange the SDR into an international, reserve currency, and that's going to come at a very minor interest rate of 0.05%. So, I mean, and if you look at, Nigeria's, current, debt structure, our external debts, we pay close to 5% interest rates, on this external debt. So the interest payment that comes with converting your SDR is very, very minor, compared to the interest rates, that applies to your external debt, or even our domestic debt, where we sometimes pay, up to 14% per annum, on those particular liabilities. So I think this is a very, very good initiative by the IMF, and it will go a long way in actually supporting developing countries such as Nigeria to respond appropriately to the COVID-19 pandemic.
So since it is cost-free and minor when it comes to the exchange rate, doesn't it have any impact on our debt stock?
No, it doesn't. That's the interesting thing. So we are not incurring any liability. We are not borrowing. This is not a debt. This is an asset that has been created by the IMF and then gifted to every single member country. You know, like I explained earlier, you know, developing countries particularly who these initiatives are purposely for, they've not been able to respond as much as possible to the COVID-19 pandemic, you know, by supporting their businesses and households. And that's going to have a long-term impact on the growth trend as well as development. So for instance, in 2020, the global economy is expected to grow by more than 5%. But African countries who already have the lowest per capita income, you know, in the world, they're expected to grow at just about 3.5%. That is, the African region will be growing at a rate that is less than the global economy, and that's an anomaly. So, developing countries are very much constrained in exposing to the COVID-19 pandemic because of a lack of resources. So, this particular SDR disbursement is not a debt. It is an asset that we are not obliged to pay back, that we are not going to pay back, but that will serve the purpose of creating the much needed resources, for the government to import very essential, items that are necessary to confront the pandemic, such as vaccines, for instance, such as food, for instance, because, as we all know, we are currently facing the food crisis in the country. So that is the purpose of this disbursement. It is not a debt. It is an asset that will supplement our current international reserves.
Right. Okay. But how do you see this impacting the FX liquidity?
I think it will go a long way in supporting FX liquidity in the country. So as we all know, the economy, are faced by a major FX liquidity crunch since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. The high-yield window has gone from trading above $300 million per day to trading less than half of that, currently. And that has had an impact on inflation in the country because empirically, every currency adjustment has nearly 20 to 25% pass-through on domestic prices. It has had an effect on inflation expectations. It has had an impact on economic growth as well. So definitely the central bank requires, much more resources to be able to supply liquidity in the foreign exchange market and, of course, support the economic recovery and also help to moderate inflationary pressures. So Nigeria's share of the SDR disbursement is about $3.35 billion, which is equivalent to roughly 10% of our international reserves, which is around $33 billion currently. So it's going to go some way. And then if you also combine this with the fact that the federal government recently, appointed financial advisors and book runners for an upcoming Eurobond issuance, which could be as much as $6 billion. So if you combine the liquidity expected from both the Eurobond issuance as well as, the SDR disbursement, that would imply that, before the end of, before the beginning of the fourth quarter of the year, the CBN could potentially have additional resources of at the minimum $6 billion to be able to supply liquidity in the foreign exchange market. So I believe it is positive for liquidity in the foreign exchange markets, and also much more important, it's so good for instilling confidence in the economy. So the foreign exchange market sometimes it doesn't work only on fundamentals alone. It works based on sentiment. So if your reserves appear very strong at about $40 billion, if we are able to clear some of the backlog of FX demand in the country, which is estimated, at close to $10 billion, for instance, then, very definitely, Nigeria should once again become a center of attraction for foreign portfolio investment and foreign direct investment. And that will unlock autonomous foreign exchange inflows in the economy that will help kickstart, the recovery that we very much expect.
So, talking about FX, now, at the end of last week, Naira gained against, the foreign exchange. Do you connect this to some of these factors you have noted and also the latest move by the CBN, in managing FX? Hello, Motola, can you hear me? Oh, I guess we lost Motola there. Yeah,
it froze there.
Yeah, it will be interesting to know because, when the CBN made the move, about stopping supply to
the BDCs.
the BDCs, it did not receive a lot of applause.
Yeah.
You know, but
some were actually in support of it, though.
Yeah.
Funny
Yeah,
enough.
but you know, a lot of people were criticizing that.
Mixed reactions.
Yes.
Yeah.
There was also a lot of criticism because this is not the first time the CBN has done this. And a lot of people have even said accessing foreign exchange through the banks has been troublesome, you know, not that easy, you know. And a lot of people have to go to the bureau de change operators. So now if you're now taking them, well, not out of circulation, but when they don't have supply, they have to get that supply anyway.
I wonder how else, what other means the BDCs are actually using to get dollars at this point.
There are different means. I mean, like the CBN governor did note some embassies, NGOs, and international individuals and organizations. I think we have Omotola back now. So Omotola, hello Omotola.
Hi.
Okay, good to... Yeah, no, good to have you back. So we're trying to see, looking at the work or the decision of the CBN in the past week, where we saw them stopping supply of FX to the bureau de change operators, and then we saw at the end of trading last week that Naira gained, even though yesterday it depreciated. And want to see if you see this connected to the decision of the CBN.
Indeed, I believe so. So initially, when the CBN first came out with the policy, first announced the policy to screen out BDCs from official FX intervention, there was a knee-jerk reaction in the parallel market. The Naira went as high as 525 Naira to the dollar, on the sell side. But now I believe that having distilled that news and having been able to properly analyze the impact of that decision on FX liquidity, in the market, we have seen market participants now being a lot more cautious when it comes to, speculating on the currency. That's why we saw, a very sharp appreciation of the currency, back to the level of around 510 Naira to the dollar in the parallel markets. So our home view is that fundamentally, the Naira appears very, very cheap in the parallel market, although it looks very expensive in the high-and window. Fundamentally, if you value the currency based on the equilibrium really effective exchange rate, it does appear as if the fair value of the currency is somewhere around the middle, maybe between 5.6 to 5 something Naira to the dollar. So definitely the exchange rate in the parallel market looks fairly cheap. But I think this is also a factor of the lack of liquidity in the official segment. So many market participants, they've not been able to, including manufacturers in some cases, and other, legitimate source of demand. They've not been able to get enough, foreign exchange in the official segment. So many of them, have then moved to the parallel market to be able to get, their FX. Now, with the expectation that, going forward, after the CBN receives, the SDR disbursement, which is scheduled for the 23rd of this month, and then following the Eurobond issuance by the federal government of Nigeria, the CBN should now be in a better position to actually supply, more liquidity into the foreign exchange market. So I believe that, over the short to medium term, you should probably see the Naira, continue to appreciate towards its fair value.
All right, so we'll be counting down to the 23rd of August when that quota will come. Indeed. And then we'll look forward to the impact on the market. Thank you so much, Omotola Bimbola, investment analyst with Chapel Hill Denham, for sharing your thoughts with us this morning. And enjoy the rest of your day.
And you too. Thank you.